You explain yourself too much, and it's costing you more than you think. Most people don't even realize it. Every time you justify, you lose authority. Not because you're wrong, but because you're visible. Once people see where to push, they don't stop. Machiavelli understood this 5 centuries ago. He watched the marble courts of Florence devour the eloquent and reward the silent. There's a reason powerful people don't explain themselves, and once you see it, you won't move the same way again. He documented what he saw in The Prince and in private letters that were never meant for public circulation. His conclusion was clinical. Reaction is weakness made visible. Explanation is submission with extra syllables. The man who answers every accusation has already handed his enemies a map of his interior. But the modern mind has been trained in the opposite direction, trained to defend, to clarify, to manage perception, to respond. That training is the leash. There exists a colder architecture. 7 psychological mechanisms, surgical and deliberate, used by popes, ministers, generals, and merchant princes to neutralize manipulators without ever raising their voice. They were not philosophers, they were practitioners. And what they practiced will rearrange the way you move through every conversation for the rest of your life. Once you understand these 7 mechanisms, no provocation, no insult, no manufactured crisis, no test will land on you again. Picture the boardroom, the colleague who has been waiting 6 months for the opening, finally letting the jab fly across the conference table. Picture the family dinner, the relative whose questions are loaded with judgment dressed up as concern. Picture the message thread at 11 at night, the text engineered to extract a reaction. In every one of these arenas, the person who reacts has already lost. You have lived this. You have replayed those conversations at 3 in the morning, drafting the perfect response that arrived a day too late. That ends here. The 7 mechanisms begin now. Machiavelli was not a tyrant. He was a bureaucrat, a diplomat, a man who spent 14 years inside the most dangerous court in Renaissance Europe, watching popes poison cardinals, watching merchant princes assassinate their cousins over marriage contracts, watching emissaries return from Rome with their reputations cremated. Then, in 1513, the Medici family returned to power. He was arrested, tortured on the strappato, a device that dislocates the shoulders by hoisting the body from the wrists. And still, he came back thinking clearly. They released him to a small farm outside the city walls. He spent his exile writing, not theology, not poetry. He wrote field manuals for power. The prince became the most famous, but the unfinished notes, the diplomatic dispatches, and the private letters to his friend Vittori contained something deeper. A behavioral system, a cold logic for surviving in any room where ambition is present. That cold logic compresses into 7 instructions. They are not motivational, they are not gentle. They were written by a man who had been broken on a torture device and lived to think clearly afterward. Approach them in that frame. They are not advice, they are mechanics. Mechanism number 1, the silence doctrine. Reaction is information, and information, in any room with stakes, is currency. The instant you flinch, sigh, scoff, raise your eyebrows, or fire back a clever line, you have transferred wealth across the table. Your opponent now knows where the nerve lives. They know the depth. They know how to find it again. Machiavelli observed this in the Vatican corridors during his diplomatic missions. He noted that Pope Julius II, the warrior pope, was famous for his eruptions of anger. Cardinals studied those eruptions like astronomers studied comets. They mapped the conditions, the triggers, the durations. Within months, the most ambitious of them could provoke or avoid the Pope's rage at will. His emotional volatility had become their navigation tool. The opposite type, the man who could absorb an insult with no facial change, became unreadable. And unreadable men are unmanipulable men. The silence doctrine is not passive, it is active. It is the deliberate decision to deny your opponent the data point they came for. When the colleague drops the loaded comment, the silence is the verdict. When the relative weaponizes concern, the silence is the wall. The longer the silence, the more unstable the manipulator becomes, because manipulators rely on a feedback loop. Cut the loop. Watch them spiral. Practical application. When provoked, take a single beat. Do not respond. Do not match their energy. Do not even acknowledge the comment landed. Look at the speaker the same way a chess master looks at a poorly considered move. Then continue the previous topic as if no interruption occurred. The interruption will not be repeated. Mechanism number 2, the refusal of justification. When you explain yourself, you are accepting the premise that your behavior is on trial. You are conceding the right of the questioner to be your judge. The average man surrenders this right reflexively, without realizing he has done so. Cesare Borgia, the model for Machiavelli's prince, refused to defend his actions in public. Not when accused of murdering his brother, not when accused of poisoning his rivals, not when the streets of Rome filled with rumors of incest and butchery. He let the rumors swirl. He acted. The acting answered everything. Compare this to a man caught in modern life. Asked why he did something, his entire skeleton seems to lean forward into the explanation. He produces context, history, mitigating factors, careful clauses. Every word is a tooth he has just handed to the questioner. Machiavelli's principle is severe. Justification dignifies the accusation. The strong do not explain because explanation requires the explainer to be the one in deficit. Cardinals understood this. Banking families understood it. War generals understood it. The lower the social position, the more elaborate the explanations. The higher the position, the more compressed the response, until at the apex, the response becomes a single look or no response at all. Practical application. When pressed for justification, respond with a question. Why do you ask? Or simpler, state the conclusion without the reasoning. I made the decision. Move forward. Do not extend the surface area for attack. Every additional sentence is a new handle for your enemy to grip. Mechanism number 3, strategic ignoring. This is the most aggressive of the 3 commands and the most misunderstood. Ignoring is not avoidance. Avoidance is fear with manners. Strategic ignoring is the calibrated decision that a person, a comment, or a provocation does not exist within your operational reality. Arthur Schopenhauer, who studied Machiavelli closely, wrote that contempt is the only emotion against which there is no defense. Insult invites an exchange. Anger invites an exchange. Even hatred invites an exchange. But contempt, real contempt, the silent removal of someone from your category of significance, leaves the manipulator with nothing to push against. This is why the salon dynamics of 17th century Versailles were so brutal. A noble could be destroyed in a single afternoon by being looked through, not insulted, not banned, looked through, treated as if his presence in the room had no informational content. Within weeks, the entire court would mirror the treatment, and the man would discover that his social existence had quietly evaporated. The modern translation. The colleague who refuses to acknowledge your input in meetings. The friend who stops responding to texts and resumes the friendship 2 weeks later as if nothing happened. The boss who walks past the man trying to explain himself. These are not lapses, these are weapons. The targets feel them in the chest. Practical application. Identify the people in your life who feed on your reaction. Reduce your reactivity to them by half each week. Not coldly, not theatrically, quietly. Their performances will escalate, then fragment, then stop. They will move on to softer targets. You will never miss them. Mechanism number 4, the mask of indifference. The first 3 mechanisms govern your output. The 4th governs your face. You can refuse to react verbally and still leak your interior through your expressions, your posture, your micropauses. Sophisticated manipulators read these signals far more carefully than your words. Machiavelli was obsessed with this. He warned that a prince must be a great pretender and dissembler, not because dishonesty is virtuous, but because the world is filled with men who study faces for fractures. To show a preference is to expose a hostage. To show a fear is to draw a target. To show desire, even desire for a meal, even desire for a chair near the window, is to create leverage. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, wrote in his private journal that he had trained himself to receive bad news and good news with the same arrangement of features. The court could not predict him. The court could not bargain with him. He died holding power his less disciplined successors would lose within a single generation. The modern science confirms the principle. Behavioral analysts study facial microexpressions because the face leaks at the rate of 40 milliseconds. The trained negotiator, the trained intelligence officer, the trained corporate operator, all train themselves to flatten this leakage to a baseline. Not coldness, just absence of tell. Practical application. Practice the neutral face the way an athlete practices a stance, in the mirror, in low-stakes conversations, in moments when you receive surprising news. The goal is not deception. The goal is the elimination of free intelligence flowing outward from you to anyone who happens to be watching. If you have followed this far, the channel exists to dismantle exactly these unspoken systems. Subscribe before the next mechanism. The men and women who watch one of these videos and walk away will revert. The ones who watch them in sequence will not. Mechanism number 5. Calculated distance. Familiarity does not breed contempt. Familiarity breeds estimation. The longer someone is around you, the more accurately they can estimate you. The more accurately they estimate you, the less power you have over them. This is why every ancient court structured itself around layered access. Not because the rulers were arrogant, but because they understood that proximity erodes mystery, and mystery is the substrate on which authority is built. The papal court of the Borgia era required 12 separate antechambers before a visitor reached the pope. Each antechamber stripped familiarity from the visitor and added weight to the eventual encounter. By the time he stood before the throne, his nervous system had already been recalibrated. The pope had not said a word. The architecture had said it for him. Machiavelli warned that any prince who became too accessible to his subjects, his ministers, or even his lovers, would lose the power that distance had built. He cited specific case studies: the duke who drank with his soldiers and was assassinated by them within a year, the cardinal who shared confidences with his secretary and was outmaneuvered by that same secretary inside of 6 months. The modern translation is direct. The boss who eats lunch every day with his team is the boss who cannot fire any of them without emotional cost to himself. The friend who hears every detail of your life is the friend who can predict you. The lover who is told everything is the lover who soon hears nothing of value. Practical application. Withdraw deliberately, not from the room, but from full disclosure. Keep entire categories of your life private. Develop the habit of replying to questions about your weekend with a single sentence. Most of what you say does not need to be said. The unsaid portion is your reserve. Reserves are the basis of power. Mechanism number 6. Information asymmetry. Know everything, reveal nothing. This is the harshest of the 7 mechanisms because it requires real labor. Silence is free. Distance is free. Information asymmetry is expensive. It demands attention, memory, and patience. Imagine walking into a room, and someone already knows everything about you. That's how Cardinal Richelieu operated. The chief minister of France in the 1600s ran a private letter network that surveilled every noble household in the kingdom. He read 400 to 500 reports per week. By the time a duke walked into his office to negotiate, Richelieu already knew what the duke had eaten for breakfast, who he had argued with the night before, and what financial pressure he was concealing. The negotiations were not negotiations. They were performances. Richelieu had already written the script. Machiavelli described this principle in cooler terms. He wrote that the prince must know his subjects better than they know themselves. He must collect information continuously and store it without revealing he has stored it. The moment the prince displays his knowledge, he forfeits the knowledge as an asset. He must instead allow others to underestimate the depth of his awareness, then act, then move on. The modern application is mundane and devastating. Listen more than you speak. Remember small details people drop without intending to. Ask follow-up questions that confirm what you already suspect. Build a slow, accurate model of every person who matters in your professional or personal life. Do not announce that you have built this model. Use it silently when decisions are required. The man who knows the room is the man who can read every move 3 turns ahead. The room cannot read him. Asymmetry is the precondition for every form of strategic dominance ever recorded in history. Mechanism number 7. The patience weapon. This is the final and the slowest. It is also the most reliable. The majority of enemies destroy themselves. They self-immolate through impatience, through arrogance, through the mistakes that ambition without discipline produces. Your task is not to destroy them. Your task is to remain standing while they generate their own collapse. Augustus Caesar, who Machiavelli studied with care, used this mechanism for 12 years. He had political enemies in Rome who maneuvered against him constantly. He did not strike. He waited. He let Mark Antony exhaust himself on the Eastern campaigns. He let the Senate factions fragment over their own grudges. He moved only when each enemy had already produced the rope of his own undoing. Machiavelli described patience as the rarest virtue in princes, because most men cannot tolerate the discomfort of a wound that has not yet been answered. They must respond. They must counterstrike. They must demonstrate that they will not be moved upon. This compulsion is the leash that pulls them into avoidable wars, avoidable feuds, avoidable losses. The disciplined operator does the opposite. He absorbs the offense. He files it. He continues building. He waits for the moment when the offender, drunk on his own momentum, makes the move that exposes him. Then the response is brief, precise, and final. The modern version. The colleague who spreads rumors will eventually contradict himself. The friend who triangulates against you will eventually triangulate against the wrong person. The relative who corrodes from within the family will eventually overplay a hand at a public dinner. You do not need to expose any of them. Time will. Your job is to be the calm figure still standing when the dust settles, untouched, with your reputation intact and theirs in fragments. This is the deepest lesson Machiavelli left behind. The strongest weapon is the willingness to wait. Look at the 7 mechanisms together. Refuse to react, refuse to explain, refuse to acknowledge those who have not earned your attention. Wear the mask of indifference, maintain calculated distance, hoard your information, and outlast every opponent through patience. These are not gentle instructions. They are not designed to make you well-liked. They are designed to make you ungovernable by the manipulators, the energy vampires, the office strategists, the family corrosives, the romantic destabilizers, and every other category of person who specializes in extracting value from your reactivity. The transformation is not loud. There is no announcement, no declaration. You will simply notice, over a period of weeks, that the people who used to control your moods have lost the cable. They will test you. They will escalate. They will manufacture small crises to relocate you back into the old reactive position. Each test will fail. Eventually, they will stop testing. What replaces the chaos is a strange, cold quiet. The quiet of a man or a woman who has stopped renting their nervous system to other people's drama. The quiet that medieval kings, Roman emperors, and Renaissance popes paid entire treasuries to acquire. You can acquire it for free. The cost is the 1,000 reactions you have already wasted on people who do not deserve a single one. Machiavelli wrote that fortune yields to the audacious. He was half correct. Fortune yields to the disciplined, to the silent, to the patient, to those who refuse to display their interior, refuse to justify their conduct, and refuse to acknowledge those who have not earned acknowledgement. You have now seen the architecture. The next move is yours. Subscribe before you leave. The mind that watches one of these videos in isolation will revert. The mind that watches them in sequence will not. Stay quiet. Stay distant. Stay patient. The room is already changing.